Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Peter Ferry and Jason Creighton, the design team behind the successfully funded Factions Battlegrounds Kickstarter campaign. They've been friends since they were kids, and Factions Battlegrounds is the duo's first game to market. Jason, Peter, welcome to the Binge. How you doing?
We're doing well. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for letting us take this opportunity.
Oh, thanks for coming on the podcast, man. I got to thank you guys for your time. I know you guys are busy guys. You just finished this campaign, right? So and successfully funded, I would say. Maybe let me just really quickly go through the numbers on your campaign. So you guys ended up with, I'm going to say some Canadian dollars because it always sounds larger. $25,000 on an $8,000 goal, 377 backers for your first campaign. That is incredible. So congratulations to you guys. That is super, super awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
So let's start a little bit about kind of the history behind this, because you guys are friends and you've been friends for a long time. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you guys first met?
Yeah, for sure. I'll take this one and then Jay could finish it up. But we actually met officially in about 1990 when we were in kindergarten. And
Wow.
That's when we technically met. I don't have any recollection of any interactions with Jason at the time, but we've just, I guess, known each other literally as long as we can remember. Had some very similar interests in kind of terms of board games and fantasy games and just games in particular, and a lot of other things too. And we just kind of grew close and grew up together and have stayed in touch ever since.
That's
Absolutely.
crazy.
Yeah. So we've had an interest just in the idea of like fantasy games and gaming in general. I feel like all the way until when we were in grade school and we made the original version of the game up until now. So that we've kept that bond for the entire time.
Oh, that's amazing. I tell you, having friends for that long, I don't think I know anybody from when I was like 5. So, and to stay friends this long, I think is a testament to probably the kind of back and forth symbiotic relationship you guys have when you approach things like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's your day job? What do you do before you started making this game? What do you guys do for a living?
So I'm a high school art and design teacher. And so the neat thing is we actually have several students who are part of the project, who are part of our art and design team.
Yep.
So it's really cool to be able to have that part of it. But yeah, so that's what I do. When I wasn't doing Factions, I would take design projects and illustration projects over the summer. So this replaced that for sure.
Now, are you able to like force play testing with your students and say like, look, your grade is dependent on your review of this game?
No, there are students who volunteered to test it out, and that was pretty cool. So we actually had like a club at my school called the Generals Club, where we'd have several students who actually play tested the earlier versions of the game and gave us feedback.
Oh, that's crazy. And Peter, what do you do? What's your job?
Yeah, I have a background in nonprofits. So I've worked for a few different nonprofits, and currently I'm in development for a university. And basically, I just ask people for money anyway. So it was a pretty good fit. We had Jason, who's the talented artist piece of this, and me, who just kind of bothers people to give them money anyway. So it was a perfect match for a Kickstarter, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Very, very complimentary, I would say, those two jobs and the two styles.
Yes.
So you're two different roles then. Okay. So, Peter, you designed the game, you came up with kind of the mechanics and so forth and how it played out. How did that come about? How did you come up with the idea for the game?
Yeah, so essentially there were a few different kind of games that I really enjoyed playing. Jason and I grew up playing Magic the Gathering. I mean, that was our life for middle school, and part of high school was just, constantly playing Magic the Gathering. So having cards that represented different monsters kind of in a fantasy setting was a huge thing for us. And then also playing some games like Summoner Wars was a big influence on us, and a few other games. There's also a computer game. It's called Heroes of Might and Magic, where basically you were the general of an army, and you walked around this map and recruited these different monsters and tried to eliminate the other kingdoms. And so kind of a fusing of that. Those were just three things we were always just extremely interested in. So when we kind of had this idea, at the time, insane, in my opinion, idea to make a board game.
Yeah.
It was always going to be along the lines of this particular genre. And so kind of knowing some of those games and adapting some of the things we liked about them, some of the things that we thought we could do differently, like not necessarily have a deck, kind of be able to move units over a battlefield. Those were kind of some things that we wanted to put into place. And then not having any design experience, and Jason, and we did have clear roles, but we also had our hands involved in pretty much everything. We just did a lot of trial and error and testing, and reiterated the game about 3 or 4 times. But that's kind of the genesis of where the mechanics and the general idea for the game came from.
So these different factions, these characters. So is this something that, now did I hear somewhere you guys had like drawings or something from like your kid that you base this on? Or
Yes.
How'd that come together? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so actually, I still have this Goosebumps binder that has like 300 of our original drawings that inspired the grade school version of the game, which, the rules don't make any sense, but it gave us like really the framework. And so a lot of the images, initially we did this print run of 300 images when we were making the real version, based upon those illustrations, and that really inspired the actual game that we have now. So even the faction names come from some of those original illustrations that we still have currently from grade school.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Now, are these going to be framed at some point? So when you your gaming studio, people are going to walk in the lobby and you're going to have the original like sketches from high school there.
That's definitely the goal. They have to be protected at this point. So
we got to get them out of that Goosebumps.
I know,
that's the first step.
It's still there.
Yeah. So.
And then the artwork, coming up with the design for these characters and design for the factions, is that something that was collaborative, or how did you kind of bounce that off each other, being so close in kind of the development of the game where one person's clearly in charge of the art? How did that dynamic work between the two of you?
Well, I'll let Peter start that because he actually created the original framework of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically it's kind of interesting. We went to a couple of proto spiel events, and we kind of got our game tested and everything. And it was great. We got great feedback. We knew that we had to pretty much start completely over because there were some things that were terrible. So, but kind of what we noticed, and this is where kind of the development of our art team and the mythology behind the game kind of came into play, was that everybody there looked kind of like me and you, James. I mean, there's a bunch of middle-aged kind of white guys playing with characters that were inspired from European mythology for the most part. So when Jason and I kind of got together, we said, let's try to maybe, enhance the overall world of gaming in a way, and build a game that features some mythologies from different parts of Africa, parts of South America that you don't traditionally see in a straight on fantasy game like this. And let's have our art team kind of look like the people that we also want playing the game as well. So that's where Jason kind of came in as an art teacher, and having a diverse background of students. Jason kind of floated the idea, and I'll let you take it away from here.
Yeah. So initially it was just Peter and myself when we had like about the first year to year and a half of just kind of, playtesting again the game set and just the visuals and designs ready. And then I actually recruited about 4 or 5 of my students, and then actually branched off into 7 of them. And so we had those students help create some of the initial framework of the illustrations. And then we'd have these design meetings where we'd meet, every week and kind of bounce things off of Pete just to kind of get things locked in. Yeah. And then initially we hired other artists, so artists that had more experience, a little more professional, but it was originally the students who helped kind of really create the visuals and the framework of the game. And so each faction is really built around 1 or 2 different cultures, and so in their mythologies as well.
So cool.
Yeah, and that was the really unique thing. So then to have, even like one faction which has a lot of Native American influences, but it's like the horror elements of their folklore. And so really to create this different look that you really don't see in the fantasy setting, and that was one of our goals. And then to have the students help implement that in the beginning.
Can you talk a little bit about the representation of women in this game? One thing I was really impressed by is one of the reviews that I saw. I'm not sure if it was Dice Tower or somebody had done this review, or maybe the Gamers Guild, but it was a non-paid review. It was a review of somebody that just loved the game. And the reviewer made the statement that, look, he had 5 daughters. And one thing that he really loved about the game is the way the women were represented as characters in the game, as fighters, and the type of attire and so forth you had them wearing. Is a game that he felt good about sitting down with his daughters and playing this game. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So Pete, start that, and I'll talk about how
Sure.
that was with the artists.
Yeah, so I think that it's, Jason and I are not women. We're both men, and we both. I think that part of it was just listening to why more women don't play games like this, and a big recurring thing that has come up, and I know it's been getting better and better, is that women are not practically geared for battle in a lot of these games, or they have body types that are kind of unattainable, or they're just represented more as either sex objects or something that men would find appealing. And so just kind of starting from that framework, and then just kind of delivering from the ground, from day one, saying let's not do that. Let's not do that as much as we can, and let's make sure everybody feels comfortable and feels like they can relate to, even though they're mythological monsters for the most part. Let's make sure people can relate to the mythological monsters, as crazy as that sounds. Let's make sure they feel comfortable, playing the game with the cards that are on the table.
Oh, that's
Absolutely.
awesome. Having $2 myself, as soon as I heard that, I thought, I got to play this game. I got to play this game. I love it. Now, there's two areas where you really put some stakes in the sand here on this game. The one, when people read your Kickstarter page, and we're going to get to your Kickstarter page in a second. I mean, you put it in bold that this is a no luck game. So that's a pretty major stake to stick in the ground. What's the thinking behind that and the rationale?
Yeah, so kind of just to jump into a little bit of the mechanics on how we actually did that is each unit, you start with as many units as you want, as many units as you can play. They all have an ability called rank. So the units actually move based on their rank attribute. So James, let's say you have a unit with a rank of 4, I have a unit with a rank of 3. Your unit would move first, then my unit, and then once all the units have moved, the next round would begin. So there's not really any turns in that way. And then as far as the luck goes, we wanted it to be, because of the rank system, everything is reliant on your choice. So that the combat is fixed. So units have an attack stat. That's how much damage they do. That's how much damage they'll take. There's no dice or anything like that. You build the battleground beforehand. So that way you can kind of tactically decide where you're going to place your units and choose where you're going to, attack, where you're going to defend, that sort of thing. And then there's no deck either. You start the game with 12 units. You can choose any of those 12 units to start with. And there's different opportunities throughout the game where you can purchase or recruit any unit that you'd like. So you have all your options available. So basically kind of the way that we skirted around luck, for the most part, I guess you could say, is by saying, let's put all the options on the table. You have all your options on the table, and all of those options are not based around luck. So it's your choices versus your opponent's choices.
And why did you want to do that, I guess is my question.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we wanted to do completely differently from Magic was have no deck. And we wanted it to be basically, we wanted to basically be like, you are the general, here's what you have in front of you. One thing that we didn't like is you draw land and you draw like 6 more lands in Magic, and you couldn't really get to the cards you wanted to play or the cards you really like. So we just kind of thought, and this is coming from almost no gaming background. We thought, I don't like that. We don't like that. Let's have it so you can play your best cards if you want. And if you do, there's a cost to that, that's up to you, but let's just have it so that everything's on the table. And that's kind of, I think, the basic reason why. That was kind of a day one decision, and we just kind of went with it. And then as we went, we realized, hey, this is unique. There's not luck in our game, and there's luck in all these other games. So let's kind of stand by that and double down on that a little bit.
Yeah, there's definitely various camps in the board game industry around luck and how much luck should be in a game. And there's some people that absolutely hate having any luck elements. The one that always makes me laugh is when people say they hate dice, but they're more than happy having a randomly shuffled deck of cards. they're pulling cards from. It's like,
there you go.
So, and then the other decision you guys made was not to put minis in here. And for me, the natural inclination of someone doing an RPG game or a game that's got, D&D type characters is to gravitate towards minis, right? And I think one of our former guests called it plastic crack, right? It's like everybody on Kickstarter is finding ways to cram minis into their game, and you guys decide not to do that. So what was part of the decision not to do minis on this particular game?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So initially, really the goal was then to be able to get artists who have really even worked on a product like this involved in it. So we have, I mean, at this point, what, eight illustrators who are involved in the project just for illustrating the factions. And so especially to incorporate, really get women artists involved to help create the designs of those characters you were talking about earlier, but then also people of color. So to give them the opportunity to be able to create the level of representation that we wanted to incorporate and do it through illustrations. And not just do it through illustrations. One of our goals was to not have the artwork look, for lack of a better term, like very stereotypical in regards to the style you would see in fantasy. Sure. And we really wanted to give the artists the opportunity to be able to stylize their artwork and really incorporate things you don't see in traditional fantasy settings. And that was one reason for sure. And just from a cost standpoint, we could be able to give the game and really get, I feel like, new gaming demographics involved in it if we had a cheaper price point than using minis as well.
Sure. So let's talk about the game itself. So explain basically how Factions Battlegrounds works, the basic essence of the game, and kind of the elements that someone would get if they decided that this is a game that they're wanting to play or purchase.
Yeah, sure. So Factions Battlegrounds is a 2 to 4 player head-to-head combat strategy game. Basically, it involves resource management and tile placement so that you build the battleground in that way. And then you take on the role of a general who is commanding various different monsters and soldiers going up against an opponent general or generals who are doing the same thing. Each unit has 4 core stats. They have the rank stat, which I kind of touched on a little earlier. They have movement, which is how far they can move across the board. They got their attack attribute, and then they have their health attribute, how much damage they can deal, how much damage they can take, essentially. Each unit also costs a certain amount of gold, and there's different ways to gain gold throughout the game, and there's different resource centers and things like that. But that gold cost also equals the amount of victory points that your opponent would score for eliminating a unit. So, and then you play up to 25 victory points. So James, let's say you play an 8 gold unit, which is one of the better units in the game. Yep. It can do all kinds of cool spells, has some cool abilities. That's great. But then I managed to eliminate the unit. I am almost a third of the way to the victory total right there. So, right. So essentially, there's kind of a risk reward, we call it, combat system. Which the word risk, it sounds like there's luck involved there, but basically
sounds kind of lucky.
Yeah, you could say that. You could say that, but basically, you're choosing to risk how many points you want your opponent to be able to potentially get through their choices.
So the more, the stronger the unit you're using, the greater the chance somebody's going to probably target it because there's a greater reward for them targeting that unit, right? So that's kind of the risk you're taking is, I can go for a stronger opponent, but that's going to be a target that then my opponents can try to get the winning conditions sooner, right?
Yes,
correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then you place down these terrain tiles, right? So these terrain tiles you have. So how does that work? How do they come together? So you've got this, for people listening, they've got like a board that's got like a grid on it. And then it comes with these terrain tiles, and each tile has kind of, 4 squares on that have different terrains. How do those get kind of placed? Because that's the beginning of the game, the setup at the beginning, right?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jay. I can let you take this one.
Yeah. So on the board, so there are 9 spots available, and each of those spots fits a terrain tile, and the terrain tile has 4 spaces for your unit to move along. And so the idea is each faction has their own terrain. So, for example, a faction called Germano has more island spaces. So in their terrain tiles, they have more water spaces than other factions. And so, for example, Doomsam, which is a desert faction, they have more land spaces. And so the idea is you place those to kind of create advantages in regards to how you move, because you can attack and move diagonally on your own home terrain, but you can't do that on your opponent's. And so it does matter where you place things initially when you're setting it up, but also your units generate resources on your own home terrain. So it's good to place them in spaces where you can easily move along those areas have access to them. So setting it up initially does make a big difference, because it's almost a game within a game in regards to how you set it up, because you can make it more difficult for you to be able to move along those spaces and also claim resources when they're on the board as well.
And then how many of these of these tiles are there? So is it just the 9 and those 9 get arranged in different configurations, or is there like a whole bunch of different ones you can kind of choose from and you're deciding how to place those?
So each faction comes with 5 different terrain tiles.
Okay.
They're each kind of custom. Like some of them, as Jason mentioned, they have more water than land or more land than water. Each faction has a different kind of ratio for that based on their strengths and weaknesses. And then on a 2-player game, there's 9 spots where you can place it. 3-player game, there's 12 spots, and then a 4-player game, there's 16 spots with each general or player placing 4 of their terrain tiles. So the thing we liked about that is it increases the replayability because we've never played a game where people have placed the same terrain tiles in the same spots, which is really something that we were seeking to do with our game as well, is enhance some of the replayability.
So you have a lot of different mixes, combinations, permutations. So it's always a different gaming experience every time you're playing the game, which is kind of cool. I got Mike is in the lobby. His question was, with the elimination of all luck, does that eliminate the chances of winning for someone who's an underdog or maybe a less experienced player?
I'd say absolutely. Go ahead, Jay.
No, I would say because of the risk reward system, the nice thing about that essentially is because, again, if you were to place a unit that has a higher gold cost, you eliminate it, then you get that amount of points right away. Yeah. So I feel like even if you're down, Peter and I play plenty of games where, let's say I'm down, to like, 10 points. And just by eliminating one unit, I can get right back in the game. So I feel like that we never have that issue when people play it.
Yeah, I'd say experienced players, once they know how to kind of play, they can pull well ahead. But there's several different kind of mechanics that allow players to get back in the game that aren't really luck based. For example, like Jason was mentioning, if he's too close to what's called the base camp, where my units come out of enter the battleground, it's very easy for me to push his units back and just kind of catch back up in the game in that way. The other thing that we included was the opportunity, instead of recruiting units at the very beginning of the round, what happens is you can recruit units at the very end of the round. So once I move my unit too closer, I take a risk and try to attack one of Jason's units that's pretty close to where his units enter from, then my unit is stuck there. And then Jason has a chance at the end of the round to recruit a unit to just come out and knock my units back and force me back. So I have to decide how aggressive do I want to be. But overall, typically the more experienced player is going to win 3 out of 4 times if they're really good. But, there's always, if an opponent takes advantage of a mistake, then it could be anyone's game.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly gives, I think, somebody some incentive to try different factions and try different ways to take that person down and maybe increase their skill level as well.
Yeah. So Jason's a lot better than I am at it, actually. It's kind of funny. I guess like maybe this is a playtesting thing, but I always test different mechanics in the game, and then all of a sudden I find myself losing pretty much every time to a lot of people. So yeah.
So this is your first Kickstarter that you guys have done. So the two of you have gone at this. What's something you would say is something that was kind of a big learning for you guys coming in, and something that you would maybe advise other people who are starting their first Kickstarter for the first time, that's something they should maybe consider when they're coming in?
Yeah, I think I'll go first, Jake, because I know you have a lot too, but I think this community is very unique in that everyone is just so incredibly helpful and wants to see you succeed because they want to see your game and try your game. And I haven't been a part of a community, I guess you could say, that really wants to help other people succeed who could potentially be competitors. I put that in quotes, but
co-opetition.
Yeah, co-opetition, for example, like your producer was a phenomenal help. I mean, the Facebook groups were phenomenal helps. Our social media community, every convention we went to, people, were just so helpful, willing to share information. And it was really welcoming, and it was really encouraging, because there's obviously a ton of ups and downs with designing a game, but that gets you through the downs like none other, in my opinion, is people cheering for you to succeed and willing to not only cheer for you, but also willing to help and information share and say, this is a good idea for you. This is a good idea for you. Maybe think about something different from that. But I think just learning the community and listening to the community and asking the community for help is unbelievably helpful.
Absolutely. So going along with what Peter is saying, just the idea of community. And so for us, our goal was to be able to build that community roughly it was about a year and a half before we launched. And so
Okay.
just how important that is, because then essentially people are used to you and your brand, and going along with the idea of them being used to you, the idea of you sharing what you've learned along the way, because then they know not just your game, but they know you as a person and you as the creator. And I feel like that makes a big difference in regards to them being able to connect to what you're doing. And then the idea is that they want to support you, and also when you're sharing those things, it's a way to give back. So so they can learn from your your highs and your lows and your failures and your successes, and that just makes a big difference along the way as you build towards the launch itself.
Yeah, you have a fairly large Instagram following, I think about 3,500. So
Mhm.
building that over a year and a half, what are some of the things you did to build that up?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, people who followed us very early on, they saw some of the initial designs, and so we try to get the community involved and get their feedback in regards to things we would like to know. So things that they could see that we couldn't see because we're so close to the game. So having them along for that process and that journey, but also trying to get them involved in just the artwork and the lore of the game, and so really getting them excited about that. So that way, they were really into it when it was time for the actual launch. And I would say those are the two biggest things. So getting their feedback and their involvement along the way, but also allowing for them to see what makes the game special and unique. And a huge part of that was the artwork and the mission behind the game itself.
Yeah, and what's interesting, James, we were kind of talking a little bit before you kind of asked about how our Instagram community was large, and some of our other communities
Yeah.
aren't quite as big. That was intentional from the start as well, because when Jason and I were thinking about our target audience and opening the game up and exposing it to more underrepresented populations, we knew that a lot more of them were on Instagram and using Instagram than Facebook. So Jason really opened up to what's called the blurred community, and I'll let him explain that. But they were Facebook using a lot more than, or I'm sorry, Instagram using a lot more than Facebook. So we kind of just were like, let's drive this thing from Instagram and put our primary focus and resources on that, and then everything else we'll build as we go. But that's been our engine from, again, day one, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just the idea of like knowing, of course, your audience, your demographic. So Blur just stands for Black Nerd. And so they have a huge interest, yeah, and just in like pop culture, so sci-fi and fantasy. And we really wanted to be able to then reach that audience, which they didn't have as big a presence in Facebook and in traditional like board gaming groups and tabletop groups, but they were highly involved in Instagram just in regards to fantasy groups and these pop culture groups. And we knew this would be the best way to reach them and get them on board for what we're doing, just through Instagram, just as the medium.
Oh, wow. That's cool. And certainly it's paid off for you. I mean, to
Yes.
hit the numbers you guys hit. Now, did you spend money on any ads or anything like that? Or was there any kind of ads going into the campaign or during the campaign that you ran, or?
Not as much during the campaign. We did some more Instagram ads, really, again,
Yeah.
like primarily to grow our community, and especially around a lot of our posts that showed kind of some different artwork or something unique about the game. Our game, we wanted it to be one of the very first fantasy board games that a lot of people kind of either saw themselves in or played, and we really want this game to be almost I know the term gateway game is a more simplistic game that gets people more involved in other games,
Sure.
but we want this to be a gateway game for other fantasy games that just introduces a whole new group of people and who are eventually going to play all kinds of different RPGs and different fantasy games. And I think we're starting to see, it's really refreshing when we see people say, this is the first board game I bought, or this is the first, or I didn't know that games like this were around. And so we're like, yeah, there's millions of them. Just wait till you get involved. You're going to get hooked. But
It's an addiction for sure.
Yeah, but that's like really, I think, was our one of our primary focuses with this game.
So now the dust is settled, and I mean, by settled, the campaign's done. We still got to actually go and now make the game, right? But
yeah,
I'm sure you've got now eyes on the future as to what the next step is. Are you looking to do like an expansion of this game, or introduce more factions? Where does this game kind of expand from here?
Yeah, so we want to do an expansion with the game, a little one down the line, but primarily what we want to do is focus on the awesome kind of culture and world that surrounds each of the factions, and do a little bit of world building, bring in some different unique characters and some backstory, and develop kind of a cool geography, and really just kind of dive into that aspect of it.
That's cool. And then how are you going to do that? Is that just more in terms of storytelling? Is it through your Instagram channels? Or are you guys looking maybe graphic novel? Where's it kind of go from there?
Well, I'll let Jason say this.
Yeah,
He doesn't like to say this, but his background is actually he's done some comic books. So
okay.
I'll just lead with that for you.
Oh, but I would say all the above, James. So really, we do want to have an expansion down the road, which will kind of complete the factions and give the players just more options in regards to what they can choose from and be able to combine factions potentially. But then also, we really want to get to the point where we can create graphic or like at least like short stories for the time being. So and then just small stories that will really introduce people to a little bit of the lore and the characters in the factions, just to really get their appetite wet for something larger like graphic novels. And then potentially we would love to have this developed as a mobile app as well. So I feel like those are the three largest targets and things we'd like to focus on next.
Oh, wow. Well, that sounds super exciting. And I can't wait to see how this thing kind of fleshes out as you guys go forward. You've done an amazing job on this campaign, and
thank you.
I know you guys have just got to be super, super pumped. So I want to wish you guys all the best, for these this holiday season to you and your families. And I can't wait to see how this thing manifests in the day next year.
Thank you very much for having us, and you have happy holidays as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, James.
Cheers. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply join the Facebook group Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.